I always hoped he'd reach the ton, he'd get to 100, because he had a constitution like a horse, a very strong and determined character, and never ever complained about his condition, ever. He's a magnificent person. But one reflects on his life. He changed the way Australia thought about itself, and in a sense gave it a new destiny, and snapped Australia out of the sort of Menzian torpor, the sort of long period of the orthodoxy which it obtained really in the post-war years. And I think you could probably say there's Australia pre-1972 and Australia post-1972. And that exclamation mark in our national history is his mark.
Before we discuss in detail his legacy as you see it, can I take you to 1969? You were 25 and a new MP, and there's this figure, Gough Whitlam, as a Labor leader. Do you have first impressions of him at that time?
Oh well, he was then the god king of the party and the likely star. And of course, in 1969, he very nearly won the election. John Gordon pipped him only by a few seats, but the really great swing for Labor in the post-war years came in 1969. Though it was 1972, which caused the election, the government to be, the Labor Party to be elected to government. Gough Whitlam's great advances occurred in the 69 poll. So, I lived all of the cut and thrust of that election campaign, and we went into the opposition, 69 to 72, as a revitalised force, and he was there with all the grandeur and magnificence he could muster.
And 72, with that exclamation mark that you described, that's quite a weight for a leader to take onto the government benches. Everyone talks about the list of reforms: the education, the health, the Indigenous affairs, the foreign policy, the environment. Was there a sense of urgency, would you say, in Gough Whitlam's reform agenda, considering the amount of time in the wilderness?
The Labor Party in those years was not sure what it wanted to do. He not only renovated the Labor Party, but gave it a sense of direction and focus, the ability to use the executive power of the Commonwealth Parliament to do things, not simply to be incumbents. And I think it was this sort of the inner confidence he had, not necessarily seeking the approval of most people, but trying to reshape the country, reorder it, repoint it, and give the Labor Party a real sort of reason for existence.
Is it possible to put in a nutshell his legacy? Parliament's just heard hours of politicians from all sides describing their view of it. Can you describe Gough Whitlam's legacy?
He made the turn. He was there at the turning. From the post-war years, the years of complacency, the Menzian torpor, to the Australia which had a greater independence view of itself, had a more inclusive and compassionate society, and better orientation to the world around us and the place we lived in East Asia. Breaking a link with the kind of Anglosphere that had formerly dominated Australian public thinking. So it was a great turn, and that was the central turn, I think, in the post-war years.
What about his style of leadership? The public saw the orator, the parliamentary performer, the healthy ego. Yeah. What about behind the doors, say inside caucus, inside his office, over a dinner table? Was it different?
No, he had a great sense of fun and a natural humour, right? Great sense of fun and natural humour, often self-deprecating humour, But he had the mission. The mission was central, and he was driven as well. So he has the mission, that's central to his political personality, and he has the drive and the inner belief and inner confidence to carry it off.
Did his dismissal diminish his legacy? Did it enhance his legend, or was it just a very brutal reality of his time in Australian politics?
Well, it was a brutal reality, but I think in any important public life, the real assessment is the long one. And if we look at Gough Whitlam's period as leader of the Labor Party and Prime Minister and leader of his government, short nevertheless as it was, you now get a better understanding of where it sits in the firmament of importance. And it is the government of the turning. It is the government which changed us away from the kind of complacent, non-activist, paid-up member of the Anglosphere to an independent country with a better view of itself and therefore a sense of destiny which it hadn't formerly had.
Tom Uren this morning in this discussion said that in all his time in politics, there are two visionaries, only two that he's come across. One is Gough Whitlam, one is Paul Keating. What was Gough Whitlam's particular influence on you, your style, your politics, the way you handled your time in the Lodge?
Well, Tom Uren was too kind in that remark. That's the first point. Every leader is different, and we're all fashioned by our epoch, our contemporary lives. And his was one that transcended the Second World War. He served as a serviceman in the RAAF in the Second World War. And no doubt his parents' generation, he would have lived through the Depression, and so all of that would have conditioned his view of the world. Where I lived in the post-war years, the more bouncy years after the Second World War. I grew up in the 1960s, So we were different personalities. But you do try and encapsulate a vision for what Australia might be. And while not everybody will agree with that vision, while ever you have the executive power, it's sort of incumbent upon you to make it stick. And I think Whitlam had the executive power, and he did everything possible to make it stick. Some would say, in reflection, there was a confusion between ends and means. But the important thing is he made the policy changes. And you look back now in the now 30 or 40 years of history, and you can see their importance.
And did that feed directly in or indirectly in to your agenda and your motivation?
I think what fed perhaps to me was, if you've got the power, go and use it. Why be a mouse? If you've got the levers, if you've got the naked flame, hang on. I think he and I had that in common. And also, we like the words, we like the words and the thoughts. But we're from different ages and epochs, but we both had, of course, one interest in mind. That is Australia, its people, and most of all, the ordinary men and women of Australia who have nothing to sell but their own time and who need a government to help fashion their future. I think that's what he was committed to, and that's what I've always been committed to.
In a quiet time of reflection or reminiscence, is there a lasting memory of Gough Whitlam? There are probably dozens, but is there something that you will think back on?
Many. Well, I had. Perhaps the thing that stuck with me most was I was on the first independence trip, so-called, to Papua New Guinea with him. And he raged through Papua New Guinea, arguing, of course, for its independence, against then the established Australian people who had sort of settled the country and sort of ran the place, So he was kind of like an interloper in their world, the expats who ran the place. And it was a whirlwind tour, racing through. And I always remember the sort of the sort of disregard he had for the contempt he had for the old expat structure. And that sort of, I'm trying to find the word, but lack of regard for the existing show sort of stuck with me, you know. And of course there were so many funny events on the trip that you know, these stick in my mind as happy memories of him and his wife.
Just finally, the famous moment in the public's mind, I guess, is on the steps of Parliament, November 11, 1975. As a man who is famous for his one-liners and etc., I'm talking about you, the way that famous line, "Well, may they say God save the Queen," came unscripted off the back of the person before him saying "God save the Queen." How do you view that?
Well, I was the person who handed him the microphone on the steps. If you go to the film footage, you'll see me out addressing the crowd, and I hand Gough and there's a slow motion take of me handing him the megaphone to address the crowd where he makes those remarks. So we were both indignant about Sir John Kerr's actions and knew instantly it had been a coup, and that we're entitled to, you know, to speak the truth about it.
When a public figure of this magnitude passes, we all see the policies, the legacies, the speeches, the famous photos, but you've lost a friend and a mentor.
Yeah, I've had a 45-year association with Gough over the years. Seen him many times socially as well as politically, but you know, I think when you play on the same field, you have regard for the other players. You don't give them the bear hug every day. You give them their space. He gave us the space. I always gave him the space, but space he was very much entitled to.